Sounds great. Sounds good. Thank you.
Testing. Good for you. Happy Friday.
How you feel? How's the week?
Ah, man, it's a Friday.
Even if the week full of things.
That's right. But it'll be nice. Nice weather. Hi, nice to meet you. Oh yeah, no, happy to.
We'll definitely we'll have the live stream playing as we sit up the live stream, so we're very yeah.
No. Yes. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, it was nice to meet you. Have a good night.
Sounds we're all good with streaming? Everything? All right. Yay. Sounds good. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our last HackWeek event. We're super excited, and we're very excited also for tomorrow. So just to introduce everyone, I'm Dom. I'm a sophomore studying computer science and biology, and I am on the HackWeek organizing board. This is Anna. You'd like to introduce yourself a bit?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ana Pantelic. I am the executive director of MIT D Lab, which is right down the street, and I'll tell you a little bit more later.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna get started. I have a few questions. Feel free to chime in. We'll also have a chat running if people want to type it in there as well, and we'll also leave some time at the end for Q&A. So yeah, just to introduce Anna. So as she said before, she's the executive director of the MIT D Lab, which works with people from around the world to develop and advance collaborative approaches and practical solutions. And we were really inspired by her work and wanted to introduce another aspect of our hackathon. It's not just coding and tech, there's a bit of a social aspect to it. So if you want to talk a bit about your work, and then we can go on.
Perfect. So hi, everyone. Good evening. Happy Friday. Just so you know, I have up here the dandy little cards that give you a bit more information about D-Lab, so feel free to take one on your way out. But essentially, a quick little spiel about D-Lab. So we were set up at MIT back in 2002, so we've been around for a really long time. We're a pretty interdisciplinary center that focuses on addressing global poverty challenges. So how do we do that? What does that mean for students? Well, first and foremost, one of the big things that we offer is classes. So you can take classes related to energy or humanitarian innovation. We actually have a hardware for international development class this semester, gender development, all kinds of different topics that are really focused on how you can learn different concepts and then put them into practice with real world challenges. So what do I mean by that? I mean, we work with community partners in low income, low resource environments, typically across kind of Central and South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, working with community members who don't have quite the same level of access to technology that we do here, who often are living in places that are off grid or that have unreliable access to electricity or transportation, basic healthcare needs, those kinds of things. And one of the things that we really focus on is teaching participatory design and helping you understand what it's like to work with community members from various backgrounds, cultural differences, and in contexts where you have a lot of resource constraints. So a lot of people feel like, well, working on global poverty challenges, oh, you're such a good person. but really it's not about like wanting to do good or being a good person and like patting ourselves on the back. From my perspective, these are some of the most complex challenges that you can work on. When you're resource constrained, that's when the greatest amount of innovation comes through. And you are forced to think quickly, be agile, adapt, and build something out of kind of MacGyver your way out of a situation and a challenge. And so that's one of the things that we'll you'd have the opportunity to do at D-Lab. So we have our classes. About a third of our students also get to travel. We have some funding aside for students to travel and meet with the community members to deliver the projects and meet them in person and advance different prototypes that they work on. So some of our classes are cross-listed with Course 2, MACE, some within DUSP, so it's a little bit all over the place. So feel free to check out classes for the future. We also can do year ops, etc. But why am I here today? So part of it is because the work on addressing the problems of people and planet, as I mentioned, are really complex, and there's a really important role for technology to be played in all of that. So I've been at MIT for 3 years, but before that, I had a whole career as a practitioner, as an academic, but working in this field of international development. And my particular specialty as a social scientist was looking at social protection systems, so kind of like the social welfare programs in countries, and looking at how public and private sector actors can support people living in poverty, whether it's livelihood programs or cash transfer programs. It kind of spans the gamut. And when I started that work, I found very quickly that any challenge that you look at is just immediately multiplied by a significant factor if you look at just population sizes. So if you're looking to address poverty challenges, for example, I spent a couple of years living in Colombia in South America, and it wasn't just a couple of people in poverty, it was like 2.7 million people that were receiving cash transfers and receiving support. In Guatemala, there were 3 times as many people that would have qualified for support, but there wasn't sufficient funding for it. And so the more you think about people's needs, you struggle to think about how you can serve them at scale, how you can do so equitably, how you can do so sustainably and in a culturally appropriate way, and how you can make it more participatory in your systems. And so one of the big things that I did, as I indicated, I'm a social scientist. I'm not trained as a computer scientist. And I started this work and was faced with the immediate challenge of the government saying, look, we want to provide training programs for people who are receiving social benefits from our government. But if we do face-to-face workshops in each different municipality, not only is that hugely expensive for our team, we have to travel all around the country to super rural areas, but the people that are attending these workshops, that are learning about our programs, that are learning about like financial education and how to save, avoid indebtedness, or even understanding what the benefits and responsibilities are to get that social support, they're having to spend a lot of money on a bus or a car or a motorcycle to come and participate, and somebody has to look after their kids. So there's all these costs and factors. We started asking the question, like, is there a role for technology? And nobody had ever tried to digitize a training program for populations in remote rural areas, the kind of last mile people who, many of whom have a very limited level of education. Some of them are functionally illiterate, innumerate, and yet you're trying to teach them concepts around finance and money that you're trying to also make somehow accessible. So long story short, faced with that challenge, I spent a lot of time experimenting and working with designers, with coders, with pedagogical experts, with government partners, with community leaders, with the participants themselves. And through this process of co-design and working together, we were able to generate a program that has, since its inception now 12 years ago, reached over 1 million users across 12 different countries. And we've also done research that's demonstrated that the effectiveness of what's essentially a 3-hour training course in improving people's financial behaviors. which in and of itself, like it doesn't happen. You go to, like, you listen to a financial training course, like nothing changes. But when designed appropriately, when designed with the user in mind, through storytelling, through culturally relevant examples, through design that is simplified for somebody who's like not even a native tech user, you can actually be really effective and cost effective. The program was, a quarter of what it was costing to do the face-to-face, and can achieve economies of scale. The more people you reach, the lower the costs, because the costs included things like tablet devices that were rotating in communities. So people, we're not assuming that people have smartphones and could access this training on their own. You're provided with a temporary use of a tablet computer that's loaded with an app that has this training tool on it. And through that, we could collect data, we could learn about users, we could provide updates and real-time information. We had tools that would allow them to do things like play around with an ATM to understand how it works, to understand what specific benefits they're eligible for based on a number of different factors. So I think that what I was seeing and what I've seen through my work is that there's a really important role that technology can play in making the world a better place. And more you're seeing an important role for technology in international development, addressing global poverty challenges, whether it's through training programs like the one I described, whether it's through optimizing systems for registry and distribution of benefits and services, or whether it's things like very effective sensors that you can apply for agricultural technologies or water testing, or even alert systems if there's a pandemic, for example. We're seeing more and more of a role for technology to play around the world, not just for the benefit of kind of corporations and bottom line, but also for the benefit of people. So, so my kind of plug to you is to think about what role technology could play and how you might put this to the use to the benefit of kind of people and planet. And if you are doing that, to also think very carefully about the design process and how you would design while understanding the problem and involving the end user, rather than assuming that you know what their needs are, or that your solution will kind of fit every context. So it's a very long intro and a bit of a spiel there, but I think it's really important, and I think there's huge power in that work.
Cool. And I think one term that particularly stuck with me in your introduction was participatory design. So what does that mean to you, and how do you apply it? Where do you see it being applied, or like even what is it?
Yeah. So at DLab, we think about design from kind of a three-tiered paradigm, if you will. If you think about design, kind of talk about it as design for, with, and by. People have added a fourth, design without. So design without would be design without the user in mind. So if you're doing that, you're not being good at your job. So design without the user in mind means you're like, oh, I have this great idea, and I'm designing it in a vacuum, having no understanding of what my users need. So let's set that aside. Design for is often referred to as like human-centered or user-centric design, where you have an understanding of your user needs, you do the market research, you survey folks, you take all that feedback, and then you design whatever your kind of end product is. So you have an understanding, but you are the lead designer or creator of a solution, product, service, etc. That has a lot of benefits if you are doing something that's hyper technical, and if you have certain skill set that would not be normally found within kind of your end user community. So there's a place for each one of these design approaches. The second is design with, which is often referred to as co-creation or co-design, where you're actively involving and engaging the user in the design process, where they are helping you to storyboard or prototype or even like sketch model and build something that can help you jointly come up with a solution to the challenge. And so the work that I was doing was a lot of that kind of co-design, participatory design, where you're working with the end user, and that in my case involved both community members but also government actors, and understanding kind of like how to put those together. And the third is something that D-Lab really specializes in, which is design by, and so that's kind of user generated design. So we have an approach called creative capacity building, where you work with community members to build their skills and essentially equip them to be the designer themselves, to be the ones that create their solutions. So within a kind of a typical mechanical engineering context, that might be, let's teach you a couple of hand tools, let's talk through your needs, and then at the end of the workshop, a participant might build a stove or a bicycle powered mill, or some sort of a tool or technique that makes their lives easier. But they're the ones that identified their challenge, designed, and prototyped, and they went through the whole design cycle, and you're there just there to coach and facilitate. So participatory design is sort of a suite of different things. There's a bunch of different definitions for it. But typically it's most often applied to kind of that middle one of the co-design.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I guess talking about like your own projects, you've also worked with improving the financial lives of families living in poverty. So what is the importance of like economic empowerment in your, like what you view it, and how does that apply to like students as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, so kind of a little bit of my personal background. So I am from the former Yugoslavia, country that no longer exists. We were three different countries. We're now a third version. Anyway, so we just kept changing our names, and that's a longer story. But I grew up in a country that had a socialist system, where the state provided a lot of benefits and services, where you didn't have as high rates of poverty, where you had very high rates of gender equality, where it would not be surprising for a woman to be a CEO or a physicist. I mean, that was sort of the culture that was built, and that was kind of in the period after World War II and then leading up until the 1990s. And then subsequently we had a war, country collapsed. I ended up spending time in the United States, and suddenly was faced with the very capitalistic system, very independent system, very like every man or woman to themselves. And so I sort of had these two very different systems in which I was operating. And the more time I spent thinking about the world and fairness, equity, like why, the haves, the have-nots, the more it grated on me how our countries and systems are not designed optimally or fairly. And I wanted to see how I could address that in some way. And so some people will specialize in an area like public health or education, that can have a really strong impact on people long term. But what I felt was that kind of money and finances are a proxy for access to all of that. So if you have money, you can access education, you can access healthcare, you can access a house, you can meet your basic needs. And so I grew increasingly fascinated with sustainable development and thinking about that intersection, and the complexity around resources and resource scarcity, which is becoming even more of a central issue these days with climate change, and climate resiliency. But thinking about those factors, thinking about gender dynamics, racial dynamics, wealth or class class issues, caste issues, you start to, or tribal issues. Every country has kind of their own challenges, and so for me, the kind of finances and economics were sort of that thread because of what else they could provide. And so I've done a lot of work looking at the gender gap with access to a mobile phone, because nowadays a mobile phone is your portal to the world, is your portal, allows you to access information and therefore power. Money through a mobile wallet, and therefore transactions, connection to other communities, and therefore you can build a movement. Like there's all these things related to it. And so when it comes to students and kind of thinking about your work here and your roles in life, I mean, both now and kind of like where you want to see things going, I feel like there's this feeling of, oh, I just have to kind of like, this is my pathway, this is my job, like this is a thing I've been after, and I don't kind of want to explore that or veer off the course. But I feel as though what motivates me is, again, the complexity and the intellectual challenge of problem solving, but also the passion to make a difference and have meaning. Not to say that you shouldn't make money in that, like you have to pay your bills, but ultimately it's a lot more interesting to me to be engaged in this work that is both intellectually interesting and also in some ways really satisfying, because you are making a difference and making the world a better place in whatever realm you can. And so that's something that I always urge people to think about. And even if you don't go straight into your like big passionate job that you're absolutely in love with when you start your careers, in the long term, we spend a lot of our lives at work. And so ideally, you're doing something that you feel good about and are still learning along the way. And I feel like in my space, there's still so much to learn and do. And so that's kind of why I like it.
And I guess also like when I was like researching your work, you also mentioned that when you were the SAC, you founded the first social girl. And I definitely like want to hear more about that. Like what inspired you? What were some challenges? Any major takeaways?
So one of the things that I found in this work is that a big motivator for me was also designing programs that specifically include marginalized communities. And despite being the majority of the population, women are very frequently excluded from a lot of opportunities. In some countries, women cannot inherit land or cannot own land. I believe it was in the 1970s that women in the United States were finally able to get a credit card in their own name without a sign off from their husband or parent or guardian. It's to me pretty depressing. And in Uganda, the challenges are even more acute. So I spent, so prior to coming to MIT, I spent 2 years living in Uganda, working for UNICEF in the social policy team. And I was there in the middle of the pandemic, which was its own interesting experience. Although in some ways, actually, I think better than in the US, because we had really good weather all the time. Uganda, they call it the Pearl of Africa. It's just like constant springtime. So it's just, you can be outside and it's easier to like be around people. There were also fewer deaths, which is still being studied to understand, but that's an aside. So in Uganda, talk about big problems and challenges. I think the population is about 45 million. And a significant portion of that is under the age of 18. And I think it's like 1 in every 4 girls below the age of 19 has already been pregnant or had a kid. And so you have, like we know statistically that the longer that kids and girls especially stay in school, the better outcomes they're going to have. So health and education are the most significant predictors of your success and your ability to exit poverty. And so the longer girls can stay in school, the better for them. And what was happening in Uganda is, if a girl got pregnant, she got kicked out of school and wasn't allowed back. She was considered a bad influence, right? But the father of the child could continue. They're pretty strict on what they allow in terms of education around contraception, et cetera. And so there's a lot of misinformation. And we were finding that a lot of girls were dropping out and were out of school for, partially for that reason. But other reasons include not being able to pay for it. And as much as you have public education that might not have a fee, there might be other fees associated with your schooling. In a lot of these countries, you're required to wear a uniform, which costs money. You have to pay for transportation to your school, which costs money. In some places, there are school fees, even though these are not like fancy private schools. And so without that ability to finance that, you're not allowed to go. So we had girls in school and out of school that were really struggling and unable to kind of progress and advance. And in urban areas in particular, you had a whole other host of challenges because sometimes girls would be, well, girls and boys in both cases really would be sent by the parents to the capital to attend good schools, but they might be doing so living in someone's house as a maid or house help, and so they're helping around the house, and then the people whose home it is will then pay for their school and make sure that they get an education. They don't always fulfill that promise. So they don't have a support network, they don't have a support system. And so it's really important for us to design a program that would provide them with mentoring and support, somebody that they could talk to, somebody that they could relate to. That's another thing that studies have found is, someone who looks like me and goes, and speaks to somebody who who's from a very different country and culture with a very different background and educational level, we're just not going to understand each other. But for example, there's a Disney movie, Queen of Katwe. I don't know if anybody saw it. Like a chess champion in Uganda, but a woman who came from kind of the slum areas from a very poor background, who became this big chess champion. When other kids saw that, their test scores improved. They were better, like they were more motivated. They could see a better future for themselves. They could see themselves in this girl, and therefore were more likely to succeed. So within that work, I think what was really important was to address some of these kind of critical challenges in the country, to elevate the visibility of it, and to start building out those systems in a very complex environment where there wasn't as much support. I mean, the budget for education, the budget for healthcare was just very, very low because people's pockets are not always getting lined up that way. So these are kind of the challenges, but we had amazing partners in country that really took the program on, that championed it, worked with some amazing mentors who are from the community and therefore could connect to the girls, and have had a lot of success. And the program is still running strong. They're still doing a lot of really good work and addressing some of these kind of challenges and helping girls either go back to school or find ways that they could live better lives. What's the role of technology and all of that? I mean, a lot of it is how do they connect to different services. There's also now digital training programs that are being layered onto it. There's also an effort to build out a registry that would map out people from across the community so you can reach them more easily, identify potential program participants, and on the negative side, combating a lot of misinformation that's being spread through social media. Things like, if you have intercourse but then drink bleach, that will then, make you not pregnant. Things like that make no sense, or you see a lot of kind of a push, like you need, you need this thing or that thing, and then people will do. Anyways, so there's a lot of that kind of, you see a lot more permeation of the digital world and social media from both positive and negative aspects. And so helping these participants, these young girls, understand how to differentiate and how to think critically about those things is also a really important skill that we need to think about.
I guess you mentioned there are these challenges and there are a lot of challenges. So how do you ensure that these solutions that are innovative, they somewhat concretely answer this challenge, but also be sustainable and scalable and keep living on even after maybe the original people created it?
Yeah, that's a super important question. I think with a lot of programs, we're often thinking short term and what are the benefits, and I just really want to do something good. And we're not designing with scale in mind, and we're not designing with sustainability and longevity in mind. often because we're just like building the parachute as we're falling or flying, or building the plane as we're flying, whichever metaphor you want to use there. But that's why I think design is so important. Oftentimes, even in my world and likely in many others of yours, we often have this idea for a solution, and then we're shopping around trying to find a problem that our solution will fit. Like, oh, I have this great idea, or if only people had access to this. But if we spend more time understanding the problem or challenge in the context than we do thinking about the solution, then we can have a better designed output, and also thinking about the systems and infrastructure. And so that's another critical piece of it, is what's the kind of existing, like what are the rails that you're building on? What's the scaffolding? Who are the key players? Where might financing come from? And you often see an important role for philanthropy, but philanthropy is only there for a shorter amount of time. And so that's why when looking at longer term programs, you're looking at, okay, is there interest in the private sector or public sector? How do you build into existing programs? So rather than setting up an independent program, you're saying, okay, where's there a touch point that I can address? So rather than going and doing like, oh, let me do a training program on health education, maybe there's already a place where people go for that information, and then you can layer that on. Or maybe there's a time where people meet, and then you can add this additional component to it, so that you're not creating all these different parallel programs. So I think designing with frugality in mind, again, leads to more innovation and better solutions, and can help you think about scale and sustainability. So, for example, the program that I mentioned from Columbia, I was one full-time staff member and tasked with, I think we had said we were going to reach 600 people. And so I started reaching out to, first spending time with my colleagues, like, what the heck are we doing? And, can I bribe you with a chocolate, or please help me explain this? And then over time grew and like built the team a little bit, but we were very, very small. I thought, well, I can't deliver all these workshops. I can't be there. So what can I rely on? Well, it turns out there's an existing network of community leaders who are already part of the infrastructure, who are trusted, who are known to the community, who kind of help provide information for the government program. And so we asked them, would you like to volunteer and help facilitate access to this digital tablet that you can think of it as like a library book, that I'll lend it to you for a little bit and then lend it to the next person. So as the program designer, I didn't need to know that, that Dom over there, like, she's trustworthy, but oh my goodness, her brother, he's up to no good. So I'm not going to leave the tablet with you overnight. I'm going to invite you to my house. Like, I didn't need to know any of that. I didn't need to know anybody in the community. We set it up to where you trust the community members to know what's right and to make the best decisions, knowing their own community, and they were trusted as a result. And the program was super effective. I mean, we had a scale up that was funded actually by the government, and there were 1,000 tablets circulating in the community, and less than 1% were lost or stolen. And I'm sure if we like polled students at MIT, more than 1% will have dropped their phone in a toilet, or had it, or while they were biking, or had it stolen in a taxi, or whatever the case is. So that really goes to show that if you trust the community, if you provide something of value and you trust them, and you're kind of building on those existing structures, you can reach a lot more people and be more effective, and then have that sustainability.
Another question, I feel like we're at a hackathon, there's a bit of a tech focus, especially in the school.
Yeah.
So where do you see technology coming into this social good, but also political science, and especially at the D Lab, how are you incorporating new technology?
Yeah. So I think it's a really important question, and maybe I'll start with the D Lab side of it. So D Lab has traditionally focused a lot more on kind of hardware and like tools and machines, right? And there's a reason for that. It's not because we hate tech. It's because that's what you find in these communities, is because communities have been off grid, not connected to the internet. People don't have smartphones. I mean, it's just That's the reality. And part of our philosophy and our approach is also to design with what exists in the community and not to depend on having to import things. So there's actually a great example of an alumna who built a motorcycle ambulance, and it's now actually being completely fabricated in country using local materials and local local builders, as opposed to having to ship in kind of different parts from abroad to make it work. So we really want to make sure that whatever we build is serviceable and locally relevant, et cetera. But in the longer term, we're seeing we've been seeing a more significant role for technology. And so at D-Lab, we now have a project that started about a year ago that's looking at repurposing refurbished phones that have a huge resale market in sub-Saharan Africa, and seeing how we can how we can put refurbished smartphones to use for development, but also how you can enhance technologies using sensors or other digital components that can help you be more productive and effective, whether it's kind of like measuring the output of your machine, or whether it's there's a project where a woman had built a cook stove, an oven rather, a charcoal powered oven, and so by attaching sensors to it, she didn't have to open the door that frequently, so that you didn't have energy loss. You were able to reduce the amount of charcoal that you're using, et cetera, by that combination. But longer term and kind of more broadly speaking, there's a huge role for technology in international development, and you're seeing a lot of it through investments. I mentioned, ag tech, health tech is another area as well. You now have community health workers that are kind of serving last mile remote patients. These are people who have some degree of medical training, but they're not medical doctors. And in countries where you have a very low ratio of trained medical staff to populations, particularly in rural areas, with technology, they can access information online. They can access tutorials. They're able to support diagnostics using those. They're also able to capture data and help report those back to government agencies to flag when there are pandemics coming up, or when there's something that's coming, other major issues that are coming up. So it's helping farmers understand weather patterns, and similarly, going back to kind of the financial side, financial institutions to provide microinsurance so that farmers can be insured if their crops suffer as a result of heavy rains and flooding. So you can do a lot of analytics around kind of the intersection of environment and economics. You can do a lot of remote surveying and testing. You can use a lot of satellite data for those kinds of things. So there's more and more applications that we're seeing, and it ranges from Twitter being used for democratic purposes to report abuses, all kinds of different things. So I think there's going to continue to be a stronger role for it, particularly as more and more people start accessing smartphone devices, which are also getting cheaper. And as you have greater access to the internet, you're also going to see a lot more of that.
That's ideas for your hackathon project. Anyone was looking for an idea. But as a quick break, does anyone have any questions, or were there any YouTube questions? Okay, that's good. And we can ask some more advice type of questions.
Sure.
This is maybe a broad sort of question. How do you find inspiration? Where do you find it?
Oh goodness. Like videos of puppies? No, I'm joking. I find it really inspiring to see the ingenuity of people, to see how they're able to to come up with really creative solutions despite having limited resources. I'm inspired by people's hope in the face of so many obstacles. I recently watched a documentary film called Borderland that was really focused on kind of immigration issues, and it heavily featured this indigenous Mayan uh, human rights advocate and defender of the land who had been featured in some of the films that these documentary filmmakers had made um, previously in Guatemala, and were documenting, back in the 80s, genocide of the Mayan communities. And he was, and they were being rounded up in internment camps, and he was born in one of those. And then he was fighting for their rights, and then he was being threatened, and then made the decision to cross the border. And it's been 5 years since he's seen his family. People have this vision of the United States and the American dream, and the reality is totally different for immigrants. He's and the lawyers said he's the best case, such a shut closed shut case of somebody who should qualify for asylum and support because of everything that he's done, and yet our policies are making it so difficult for him. And over again you see how all of these things are happening, and yet he continues to find hope. He continues to feel like, well, there's, I have something that's driving me. And I miss the heck out of my family, but I'm going to find a way to make this work, and I'm going to find a way to advocate for my people. And so it's, seeing people who just are able to kind of wake up, like whatever challenges you face, and then you hear a story like that, you're like, oh, my life is easy. Like whatever, thing was difficult or frustrating, the more time you spend looking at the world, the more you understand other cultures and communities, and the more you see what there is gratitude, like what there is to be grateful for, and you see the opportunities that you have to contribute to make the world a better, more beautiful place, the more you feel like I've got a lot of fight in me. And again, it's it's exciting to do that too, and it's exciting to see ways in which we're applying technology and innovation to solve some of these challenges. So I'm like, one of the things I'm super excited about. MIT launched the climate project, this big initiative, and I can't wait to see what that looks like, and I can't wait to see how it's going to benefit the frontline communities that are most affected by it. And so, I mean, that's something where like I'm super jazzed about kind of how we can also play a role in that as well.
Do you have any advice for like students who might not be sure what they want to do post grad, but they want to do some meaningful work?
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is that whatever job you get out of college is not likely, especially nowadays, to be the one that you're going to have when you retire. So don't take things too seriously. I was coming out of grad school in 2008 when there was a big old crash, and I thought, well, I have all these skills that I could apply to anything, and it took me a really long time to find a job. And it took me a while to get into international development. It took me a really long time to get into the UN. You get a lot of rejections along the way. But what I found was that in whatever job I was in, I wanted to make sure that I was learning something new every day, even if I had to teach it to myself. I wanted to make sure that I was volunteering for more responsibility, because at the end of the day, I just bang the microphone. That's what I keep with me. And it built my confidence in my own skills. It built my skills, and it built my confidence in my skills in myself that would help me with each subsequent job, so that I could be independent, so that I could create and design things for myself. And so I feel like coming out of college, I was just so nervous, like, oh, what's my career trajectory going to look like? And I can't tell you where I'll be in 5 years or 10 years. And, maybe I'll be here, maybe I'll be elsewhere. You kind of never know. But I think the more you think about, like, am I enjoying this? Is this teaching me something? Is this fulfilling me in some way? Is this leading to something else? Like, try to see what that might be. And if you're not seeing it, and you're like not getting any nibbles elsewhere, like, try to find ways that you can build and strengthen your portfolio. At MIT, one of the things we're talking about a lot is kind of the power of design and the way that you can apply design to your lives. And so think about while you're here, like think about creating a design portfolio. Think about being able to demonstrate specific things that you've done, and don't beat yourself up if you didn't get that perfect job, because you know what, that perfect job might not even be the perfect job. Like there's a reason, if you believe in kind of karma or whatever, it's like there's a reason why you didn't get that. So for every disappointment, you're like, oh, now I know why this wasn't meant to be, because this other thing happened. So I think that it's kind of helpful to talk yourself off the ledge. And it is, as much as we love to see people going into international development, you will not be judged for getting a job that pays the bills, that pays off your loans, that helps your family. Like that is also really critical and important. But longer term, think about kind of what makes you happy, because you're spending a lot of time at work.
Final question. I know as director, you might not be as hands-on with projects, but what is a project that you're interested in? Either currently at the D Lab or read about? What are you looking forward
to? So in our D Lab development class, we just started a recent collaboration with an NGO in Madagascar, and they're working on a water desalination system. And so our students got the chance to travel, and we'll be traveling again this year. But it's an exciting collaboration because we're working with a new partner, because there's a strong technical component to it, because it's in a very interesting and beautiful place that you've seen featured in movies, but you don't realize how much poverty there is and how many challenges there are. And so I'm excited by that. Just as one of the projects. I mean, our students, we had like 50 something projects last year, and students traveled to I think 18 different countries. So a bunch of different places. And I think that it's one of the most rewarding things is when students kind of click with their community partners, and they're like, oh wow, I feel like I actually delivered value for them. So while I don't get to travel with them yet, I mean, I'm hoping to, but there's not in the next couple months. I love participating in the design reviews and seeing how their projects advance. I love hearing their feedback, and I've met alums, from a decade ago, who talk about how transformative their experience was, and how the ability to apply what they learned in the classroom context to real world problems and have meaning to that. It's like it opened up their minds to the world differently. I think travel is really important, and experiencing different cultures. And I will also say that we've heard from employers that it also makes you a better job candidate, because you are independent, good on your feet, and can work with limited resources. So that kind of ability and agility, I think, can serve you really well. Yeah.
All right. So
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
Just as a little reminder for everyone, we will have a check-in in about an hour. If you want to get early, check in to get your badge, you can do that. It will be at Kresge Oval at 9. So thank you so much. And then if you guys have questions, you can come down, get a D Lab flyer as well, or ask us.
And we also have a website with all the information, or pop by N51 anytime, right next to Naco Taco.
Thank you so much for meeting, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you, and good luck. Oh yeah, of course.
First year on the team, so running all of this is like
it's a lot of work.
Yeah.